It's episode 82 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Thanks for joining me each week where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. And today is one of the episodes that I really enjoy getting to do. I have a round table, which means I have more than one guest on with me. Today I've got 4 other guests with me. Authors of the new anthology Alt.History 102. This is one of my favorite kind of episodes because there's a certain dynamic that you get when you get more than one guest on. And we had a lot of fun, and I think you have a lot of fun listening to it. Be sure to go to hankgarner.com, subscribe to the show. You can subscribe on Android or iTunes. You can listen to us on Stitcher Radio or on YouTube. All of the archives of the show are there. And be sure to click on the Amazon banner as well so that you can help support the show. Also, this episode is brought to you by Audible.com. And we thank Audible for sponsoring the show. You can get a free trial of Audible.com by going to audibletrial.com/Hank, 30-day free trial, and download a free book. It's on us. Now on to the show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I get to bring you another exciting special episode today. I'm joined by 4 writers to talk about a new collection that is releasing this weekend. When this episode comes out, it'll come out shortly after, and it is called Alt.History 102. Today I'm joined by Samuel Peralta, Will Swardstrom, Jennifer Ellis, Therin Knight, and me, of course, Hank Garner. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thanks for asking us, Hank.
You're welcome. Samuel, I want to begin with you. You joined me on this podcast a little over a year ago. I guess it's been closer to a year and a half ago now. You were on episode 6 of the Author Stories podcast.
That's
and
right.
at the time, you were really beginning your journey in fiction. Well, not beginning, but you had a few short stories out. But you were really ramping up and making a splash with some of your stories. And I told you when I interviewed you then that I had become a huge fan of your writing, and we had some great conversation about bringing a literary quality to genre fiction. And right after that, I think we even mentioned on the show that you were beginning to work on an anthology. And since then, you've kind of made a thing of anthologies. And you have had, I don't have the number right in front of me, but more than 10 over the last year, and they've all gone to the number 1 spot on Amazon. So, number 1, welcome back to the show. And just kind of tell me what has happened over this last year with what's been going on.
Well, you're right, Hank. A year and a half ago, I just started in the science fiction and fantasy genre. I came in from poetry, and I decided that I'd wanted to write stories and longer pieces as well. And I think when we last talked, I had placed several short stories in some anthologies. I'd written Hereafter, which actually went on to be noted as one of the best American science fiction and fantasy short stories of 2015. It was published in Synchronic. And I was writing Humanity, and I was just starting up an anthology called The Robot Chronicles, seeing as how the other anthologies were doing so well. And it's been crazy. It's been a year and a half, as we said, and Alt.History 102 is going to be the 13th anthology. And as you said, each one that we've released has in turn gone on to hit the number 1 spot in its genre on Amazon. So it's been crazy. That's about 12 authors per book. We've got about 120 authors now working on other anthologies. In 2016, we're planning to release another 12 anthologies. that'll bring up the count to about 25 by the year end. So it has been amazingly popular.
Absolutely, and what an incredible story to to just be trying your hand at writing fiction, and then to a year and a half later be helming one of the most consistent and one of the most well received anthology series. What was it about anthologies that really caught your attention, and and how did you know that you were onto something after Robot Chronicles?
Well, it started obviously when I was able to place a couple of my stories in anthologies. I placed the first Hereafter in Synchronic, and shortly thereafter I placed Liberty with another volume called Help Me Fund My Robot Army. The first one was edited by David Gatewood and the second by John Joseph Adams. Both were well-recognized editors, and both of these basically went on to rank really high on the Amazon bestseller list. And because of that, my stories were dragged up with it, and I began to see the anthology as a vehicle, not just for myself, but for other people to be recognized as well. I read those anthologies and I realized that some of the stories that surrounded my own stories were beautiful, brilliant. And I thought, gosh, there's a lot of people out there who are writing stories that haven't been recognized yet. And I thought if I could do the same thing with a group of other writers, then it would maybe put the spotlight on them, and they would rise up the ranks, and readers would begin to discover the stories, the novels that these authors had written, and there would be a resurgence then of good fiction that would be put out in speculative fiction. I didn't really. The time when I realized this was going to be big was maybe after the third book. Robot Chronicles did go up to #1, but it wasn't a thing until you go and do a follow-up sequel, which was the Telepath Chronicles, and then Alien Chronicles was the third, and all three of them hit the #1 spot. And I thought, gosh, this has got to be something.
There's a proud and strong tradition, especially in science fiction, of anthologies. Do you feel like there's a resurgence of the form, or do you feel like that maybe with self-publishing that the vehicle has become more accessible to authors? Do you see that anthologies are becoming a thing again?
I see it. I see anthologies becoming a thing again because of a confluence of several factors. One is the accessibility of publishing to the general populace, to authors all around the world. There are several ways through the gate now rather than going through the gatekeepers. The second is the prevalence of mobile devices and the use of these mobile devices, whether they be smartphones or tablets for reading. When you're reading on a handheld device, you're going to be naturally reading more of the short forms. Our attention spans are shorter now. We try to sneak in a read while we're waiting for a dentist's appointment or between meetings, and this kind of time and the format we read in lends itself very well to short stories, to pieces that don't require a lot of your attention and time in order to get into it. So it's all of these things coming together that have formed what I call the silver age for speculative fiction, and we're seeing readers who are looking at the anthology medium, but we're seeing a lot of writers also wanting to get on the Chronicles, creating their own anthologies, and we've seen a lot of spin-off anthologies who have acknowledged that they owe a debt to the Chronicles for coming into being. So.
We lost you right after Odadette for coming into being. But Hugh Howey a few months ago was quoted as saying that that one of the best ways to find new science fiction writers was through some of your anthologies. Were you surprised when Hugh said that?
I was really surprised when he said that.
I can imagine. How did you feel when that came out? Did it give you a sense of validation or maybe just a realization that, you know what, I am doing something good here and it's getting recognized?
Well, it definitely did give some validation to the Chronicles, and it's come full circle as well, because to tell you the truth, it was Hugh Howey and his novel Wool that brought me into the speculative fiction world in the first place. I'd read it and I'd thought to myself, gosh, I haven't read anything this amazing since Ray Bradbury. And that got me to thinking that this was something that I could myself do. So obviously, a lot of the authors in the Chronicles and in the independent author movement owe a debt of gratitude to Hugh Howey for inspiring them as well. And he's been a great supporter of the Chronicles from the beginning. He's lent some of his stories to the Chronicles. He's helped promote it as well to his followers. So for him to come and say that he sees this as an exciting way for authors to be discovered, it just is a great feeling.
Well, I think a lot of us owe a debt of gratitude to Hugh for opening the gate. We talk about gatekeepers, but a lot of us came to self-publishing, or like you said, kind of had a fire rekindled for speculative fiction through Hugh's work, and we're all very fortunate to live in a world where Hugh is blazing some trails for all of us. So we love you, Hugh. Thanks. So what got you into to Alt.History? What brought this collection and the preceding collection, Alt.History 101? Where did the idea for that come from?
Well, the general chronicles, the mainstream chronicles, have always followed the formula of a themed anthology, which was about robots, the Telepath Chronicles, which had a telepathic theme, Alien Chronicles, which had collected stories all about extraterrestrials and aliens, and so on and so forth. And as I kept going, there's obviously an infinite number of themes that you can deal with on the Chronicles basis, which have proved very popular. But I thought, why don't we challenge ourselves a little bit here and do something a little different? And so I'd started a semi-secret project to start up a new anthology line, and that was Alt.History 101, with the concept being that all of the stories would be alternative histories. It's a little different from a themed anthology now because you can take any event in history, and then we said, why don't we change it and see what happens when it comes out of that? So what would come out wouldn't necessarily be science fiction or fantasy. It would be speculative fiction, but of a different sort. So that kind of demanded that we frame a publication that was a little bit different from the mainstream chronicles. So we came out with Alt.History 101, and I can tell you that when we did that, I had a large amount of anxiety. I conceived that the cover design, branding would be totally different. The way we presented the stories would be a little different. In fact, a lot of the authors that I brought on board were new, and some of them thought, what am I going to do with Alt.History? I actually had a couple of people I tapped on the shoulder who withdrew, saying that they couldn't write Alt.History. But when it came out, again, Alt.History rose up in the ranks. It found a readership and hit #1. And I thought, gosh, well, we've got to do a follow-up to this. So now we've got Alt.History 102, and later in the year, I'm hoping to release Alt.History 103 to round out that trilogy.
Well, there definitely is a demand now for alternate history stories. We live in a time now where Amazon has created a television show based on the great Philip K. Dick story, The Man in the High Castle, and has been a tremendous hit. And so yeah, I was excited when I saw the first alt history book come out and read it, loved it. And I'm excited to see that you're continuing the series. But a question I have for you, Samuel, as we wrap up your segment and bring the others on, is when are you going to get back to writing fiction?
Gosh, I'm...
I know you're busy.
It's really tough. It's really tough, and sometimes I content myself with writing the forewords to these things. I was very lucky, actually, that Anthony Vicina, one of the someone who writes a column for SF Signal and who's also who writes a column now for the Legendarium, named one of my stories, one of my forewords, one of the top 7 stories of 2015. So I do get a little bit of creative outlet through my forewords, but I'm hoping that this year I'll be able to finish my first novella or novel and get it out there. But I do have some short stories that have been commissioned for a couple of anthologies that are coming out. I'm finishing one for a Dark Between the Stars follow-up, finishing another for Uncommon Origins, and I'm finishing another one for an anthology on clones, which are coming up. So I've got 3 stories commissioned, and they'll be short stories, but at least it'll keep the muse going so it doesn't get too stale.
I love it. Well, I'm a fan. I know a lot of other people are, and love what you're doing with the Chronicles series, but can't wait to see what comes from you also. So thanks, and we look forward to that. And
as I always say, the best is yet to come.
That's right. Jennifer Ellis, you are a friend of the show and a friend of mine. You have appeared on the podcast many times, and thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about the story that you have in this collection.
Well, thanks so much, Hank, and thanks so much for having me on your amazing show yet again. I'm honored to be part of this podcast. So my story is about Hedy Lamarr. And she was I chose Hedy because she has a really interesting history. She was a Hollywood star and had a lot of contradictions. She was born in Austria to Jewish parents. She was the first woman to appear naked in a movie in the 1930s, which caused a lot of waves. Her first husband was an arms dealer who had dealings with Hitler and Mussolini, and then had to flee to Argentina after his munitions plants were seized. Hedy left him and went to Hollywood and became a star and was considered the most beautiful woman in the world and made a lot of great movies. But she also was an inventor, and so during World War II, she invented frequency hopping spread spectrum technology, which she and her invention partner George presented to the Navy, and they classified it immediately and did eventually use it in 1962 when the patent expired. And the technology is the basis for Bluetooth and wireless, and Hedy did eventually get credit for it. So it was a valuable invention, but because she was a woman and a movie star at the time, she didn't get a lot of credit at the time. She was also very mysterious, and there's been suggestions that she was a spy. So for me, she was just a really rich possibility for stories. And she knew Hitler, right? She'd had many dinners with him. So I just saw a lot of scope there for a great story to wrap into World War II and what role she might have played if people took her more seriously as opposed to just being a Hollywood star.
When did you first discover this intriguing person and all of the possibilities? Is this something you've been carrying around in your mind for a while?
I think yes and no. I was vaguely aware of Hedy Lamarr. Don't ask me how. She just always kind of flitted at the edges of my subconscious. I must have heard about her somewhere at some point and just earmarked her as a somewhat interesting person. And it may honestly have just been because she is so rapturously beautiful. She is truly an absolutely beautiful, was truly an absolutely beautiful woman. So, really, I didn't know most of this stuff until I started thinking, okay, what can I got the nod from Samuel, which was a very exciting moment. And I thought, okay, I need to make a pitch for a story. And I just started doing a little bit more research on her at that point and thought, wow, there is so much here that I can work with. And I made the pitch before I even knew the half of it, right? Like I probably knew half of her history at that point and thought, okay, I can work with this. And it just got better and better as I went. So, yeah, she was there in my subconscious, but I don't know why.
I think that happens to a lot of us. I know there's been several stories that I had a kernel of an idea, and I knew a little bit, and then when you start, I don't know, when you've got a seed there and you start watering it with a little research and you start putting some attention and some care, they just seem to sprout and just grow, and just a whole story comes out of it before you know. Jennifer, what is your process? How is your process different in writing a short piece like this, as opposed to one of your phenomenal long form novels? Do you approach it differently?
A little bit. For a shorter piece, I really do try to have the complete arc in mind before I start to write. I really you have way less runway to work with, right? And you don't want to overwrite it. Whereas, with a long piece, you have more flexibility, right? If you overshoot your arc or your arc doesn't work, you can keep going, right? There's no limit to the length of a novel. I guess there is, but you have much more flexibility around that. So yeah, with a novel, I have some idea of my arc, but with a short story, I like to have a much clearer idea of where I'm heading and why before I start to write. Just so I also tend to write a little bit crisper prose, perhaps. Not that I don't write crisp prose for my long stuff, but every word counts in a short story, right? So I try to be much more attentive to prose, whereas sometimes in a longer piece I might be a little bit more attentive to character development, and I can sometimes play a little bit more with the words, but the short piece you do have to be a little bit more precise, I think.
Gotcha. Will Swardstrom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hank.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be involved in this project.
Sure. My story is called Requiem, and it basically is coming from the angle of it's about Mozart and Marie Antoinette. They actually met when they were both about 6-7 years old. That he played for her family. She was actually an Austrian princess before she became the Queen of France, and so he played for her family, and there was a little puppy love that was going on at the time. And so my story kind of supposes that he carried that flame for her on into the future, and then towards the end of both their lives in real life is when the French Revolution kicks off, and so he sees this as an opportunity to potentially swoop in and save his once long lost love and kind of go from there. And how I got involved was obviously I've had 3 stories in the Chronicles before with the Alien Chronicles and Z and with Immortality, and Sam knew that I was a history teacher in real life here, and he kind of knew that I'd probably get a story out if I needed to, and I was able to. I will say though that this was probably the hardest out of all those stories to write. I wanted to stay true to the history, but also change it at the same time, and it was challenging.
Is that more of a challenge with you? Being a history teacher and constantly wanting to get history right, is it a challenge to get out of that headspace and go to the what if, kind of way of thinking?
I think with me, yeah. There's definitely a couple different approaches to writing these alt history stories. As I've been reading this collection, not done yet, but I got through the first couple, got through Jennifer's earlier and mine and Artie's, and I actually just read yours an hour or two ago. And there's a couple different approaches that you can take. You can definitely go like the straight historical and just kind of tweak it a little bit and kind of keep on going down the normal path. Or we're all kind of speculative fiction writers at heart, and so a number of us have inserted science fiction into the stories too. As a history teacher, though, like, I don't think that sci-fi element ever even, like, entered my mind. Like, when I started reading this, like, oh, I could have done that. But as a history teacher, like, my thought process was, like, this is literally what would have happened if this happened instead of this. And so that's really what it was. Like, I was constantly flipping. I had, Alt-Tab on my keyboard going back and forth between my story and Wikipedia and YouTube clips about Mozart and Marie Antoinette, and it was just constantly trying to figure out, okay, where would this person be at this moment in time in history, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. When did you start writing, Will? When did you start writing fiction?
Let's see, January 2013, so about 3 years now.
Excellent. And what got you started?
Well, a couple things. Hugh Howey, of course. I've been following him. I'd read Wool. I felt I was a little late on reading Wool, but I think I was probably one of the early adopters, actually. And I read Shift as it came out. So first Shift and second and third. I don't even think I have the omnibus of Shift on my Kindle. It's all the 3 parts. And it was about the time that I think he was finishing that third Shift. I kind of had done some research into, like, who he was, and I was like, this dude's just like me. Why can't I do this too? And I was kind of at the place in my job where I was familiar enough with it, where I wasn't bringing it home with me every night, and I felt I have a little time that I could do this. So I started that, and then I was actually, at the same time, I was at the funeral for the mother of a friend of mine, and this, like, funeral scene came into my head of, and, like, the first line of my first novel just, like, appeared in my head, and I kind of, I don't know if I took out my phone and kind of jotted it down in a note or what, but I went home and I wrote out the first page and kind of went from there. It took about 6 or 7 months to finish up that first novel. But kind of been going from there.
Awesome. We'll come back to you in just a minute, Will, but I'd like to introduce Therin Knight. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be involved with Alt.History 102.
Well, let's start with how I became involved. I was in the Telepath Chronicles a long, long time ago, and I wanted to contribute another story to Samuel's great anthologies, so he invited me to do Alt.History 102. And my story is called The Blackbird Sings, and it actually takes place in roughly modern times, but the history leading up to it is quite different. It follows the common idea of what if the Cold War had become a hot war, and what happens is there's a kind of a famous incident that people know about. As we all know, there were several times during the Cold War where we almost really messed up and launched nukes. Both Russia, both the Soviet Union, and America almost destroyed each other several times. And there's one particular incident that took place in 1983 where Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty at this bunker in Moscow called Serpukov 15, which was kind of a base of operations for this satellite array that was trained on the United States to see if we were launching nukes at them. And that fateful day in September 1983, it malfunctioned and said that the U.S. had launched 5 nukes from a missile base in Montana. And Stanislav Petrov rationalized to himself that we wouldn't launch so few nukes, so he didn't alert his superiors and didn't start a hot war, and we didn't end up destroying each other in a nuclear attack. The premise has been so rational. So as a result of the satellite malfunction, the Soviet Union launched a bunch of nukes at the Pacific coast and destroyed it before they realized the satellite mistake. As a result of this, the U.S. government fell and was replaced by a new government called the North American Republic. And because of all of this turmoil and the nuclear fallout and the radiation sickness, instead of personal computing rising in the 80s and 90s to get where we are today, there was instead a focus on cybernetics, integrating our bodies with technology in order to protect ourselves from this nuclear fallout. So then we fast forward to today, and everybody is a cyborg. Instead of having tablets and iPhones and lightweight laptops and Wi-Fi, we're all cyborgs. We all communicate over networks in our brains. And the story, in particular, follows an FBI agent named Carl Lane. Her codename is Blackbird. She's this top agent. She's been all over the world. And her latest task is she has to chase down an assassin who has just killed an important U.S. senator. And her mission takes her to the remnants, the ruins of the Pacific coast, which are now called the Ashlands, and have been abandoned by the rest of the country. There's actually a wall around Colorado that goes straight up and cuts the western half of the country off. So the whole story is her and her new partner chasing this assassin through the ruins of what used to be the Pacific coast to stop his dastardly plans. And, yep, that's the story.
That's what an awesome premise. I love it. Tell us a little bit about how you became a writer. What is this something you've always wanted to do? How did you get bitten by the bug?
Well, I've always had a lot of creative ideas, and for a long time I didn't know how to express them. I've never been very good at art or any of that stuff. When I was a teenager, I really got into reading, and it suddenly hit me one day, why don't I try turning my ideas into writing? I think I was about 15 when I started kind of planning my first ideas. And when I got to college, I got really serious with it. And I actually published my first book my senior year of college a few months before I graduated.
That's so cool. Thanks for joining us. Samuel, what have you learned over this last year with putting together these anthologies, dealing with so many writers? Have you learned anything specifically about the craft in coming to this side of the business a little differently than you began?
It's a lot of hard work putting it all together. But the beauty is that I've discovered a lot of writing out there that's just brilliant. I mean, when I came in, I thought, gosh, there's a lot of writing in there. There are a lot of good writers out there. But one thing that hits me with the Chronicles is that when you're a writer and you've been invited to an anthology, and you know that everyone else is writing specific commissions for that anthology, you're driven to do your best. So what often happens is that because everyone is trying to do their best, you end up with an anthology that is just filled with gems. And that just keeps repeating on and on and on and on, and makes for what makes the Chronicles so unique. Oftentimes you're going to have anthologies which vary in the quality of the writing in there, but I don't think that you'll find a single chronicle where the stories are so uneven. Most of the stories, if not all of the stories, are just first class. And what also I find is that when you give a chance for someone to be in the spotlight, you often find that they shine brighter on their own as well. There are a lot of writers there who feel that if only they had a shot, if only they had a readership, they could make it out on their own, but they've constantly had the problem of finding their audience, looking for that audience, because there's so many other writers now who are vying for the same audience. But when they now get into the Chronicles and the spotlight is on them, it's their chance to shine and to show the reader that I am a writer that you should be following. Have a look at my other works. And oftentimes, if you do this right, the readers will follow you right into your other books. So I've had a few writers who have written sequels to stories that are in the Chronicles, or who have devised it so that the Chronicle that they're in is perfectly in the genre that they're working with, whether it be space opera or cybernetics, and the audience does follow them to a certain degree. And having that happen is actually very fulfilling, very fulfilling.
Well, you mentioned earlier this concept of giving other authors a platform and giving a chance to bring recognition to them, and that's one beautiful thing about this indie writer community is there really is a sense of camaraderie and a sense that people really do want other people to do well and want to find success. And I think we all understand that we're not all vying for the same piece of pie. We're all trying to make the pie bigger.
The pie is huge.
The pie is huge. That's right. And it's very short-sighted to think that we're in competition with one another. And there really is never a good time to not treat people well and to help other people find success. So that's wonderful that you have had that experience and that other people are finding that the Chronicle series has been a launching board for them. That's great news to hear. Will, how is it different for you when you are writing a commissioned piece as opposed to writing something that just comes to you? I know my creative process, ideas just come from the weirdest places sometimes, and I do try to be diligent to write those things down when they come to me from wherever ideas come from. And I keep a working folder where I keep track of those things. But then there's when someone says, I would like you to write a story about topic X, and here's a deadline. Then my creative process gets very different there. How is that different for you?
Well, obviously the deadline plays a big factor in that too. When I'm told that, I need this story by, January 15th or whatever, it's okay. Yeah, there's a lot, it's a lot different. And, like, for example, I think when the first story that I was commissioned for Alien Chronicles, a story called Uncle Alan, I pretty well freaked out about that one. And I took a personal day off work one day, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to write this on this day. And I didn't even go home. I went to my church, which had, we didn't have a pastor at the time, so I knew there wasn't going to be anybody there. And I just holed myself up in a room for 8 hours, and I wrote. And then that story that I wrote has never even seen the light of day because I was like, okay, I have to write this story because I had it in my mind somewhere. And then by the time I was done with the day, I just didn't like where that story was going. And it felt terrible because I'd spent all this time working on this story, and I knew it just wasn't going to work. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I had an idea for another story, and I'm like, okay, I can do that. It doesn't really have aliens in it. And I think I kind of floated the idea past Sam. He's like, whatever's going to work. And so I wrote it, and people have really taken a liking to it. And that's most of my ideas just kind of, like you said, they just kind of come to me. There's not, I don't have like this big list of potential stories that, if somebody asked me to write a story about this, okay, this is what I'm going to do. The only real exception to that is the next one that I have, that I just turned in for the Illustrated Robot Chronicles that we're working on. I actually, I had written about 2,000 words on a story last January, and then for whatever reason I stopped. And then when Sam's like, oh, let's do this, I'm like, okay, so this is the story. And then I literally opened it up almost a year to the date of when I stopped writing it last year, and then I wrote another 5,000 or 6,000 words on it this year. But most of the stories, they just kind of come to me, and that's where I go.
Nice. Jennifer, what about you? You are a very prolific writer, and you have I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Do you have 6 novels out now? 5 or 6?
6, yeah.
6, yeah. I'm trying to, without turning and looking at my shelf behind me. But you've also been featured in many anthologies. Is your process different for those two, for writing the story that Jennifer comes up with and writing a story that has been commissioned?
I actually prefer the commissioned ideas. Not that I don't think I come up with good ideas on my own, because obviously I'm still coming up with the commissioned ideas, but something about having a theme really drives me to push myself and do something a little bit different. And I feel like some of my best writing has happened that way because, I get hold of the theme and I think, okay, what can I do with this? And I often will start researching. So in this case, I researched Hetty, or in the case of Tales of Tinfoil, I had originally picked Princess Diana and Elvis. I was going to do some sort of mashup, and that didn't totally work out. I just stuck with Elvis. But I mean, just reading about some of these people is fascinating, right? So I really, really love, and just like, when I was first starting writing and I hadn't published anything, I loved going to classes and getting writing prompts, right? And having to go somewhere totally different than I would go. And not that I don't think I come up with good ideas, like I said, but they're just different. And so I really enjoy the process of working with a bit of a direction and finding something unique in that direction.
I like that too. There's something about, like you said, getting an idea that makes you get completely out of what you would normally do. And of course, you are still going to, the story is still going to be very much yours because you're writing it and it comes out of your creative process. But yeah, I think if left to my own devices, all of my stories would definitely have very specific, similar themes. But getting a prompt sometimes helps to kind of shake that loose and get you to a new place. I like that idea.
I mean, for me, it was like getting a school assignment, and it's like, how awesome can I make this, right? I mean, it was just, I love it.
Right. Therin, what about you? Do you have a different process for a commission story, or as opposed to one that you've created out of whole cloth?
I would say not really for me. I have a lot of ideas that I come up with all the time. Most of them get cycled or thrown in the trash because they suck. But the ones that I like, I usually jot down in my list of things to write, which is growing ever longer. So whenever I get a theme, like with telepathy, I probably have like 5 or 6 ideas that pop up immediately. Oh, I could do this, oh, I could do that. And the thing that I eventually settle on usually comes after I've tried to write a few different things and realize that, well, this isn't going to work for a short story. This is much longer. And that's usually my process for coming up with shorter pieces, is that I'll go through a number of things thinking, oh, this would make a good short story. And then I go to write it and realize, no, this would be a 125,000 word novel. Whoops. Try again. And then eventually I arrive on the thing that really fits into the sort of, this is one complete story that takes place that I can actually get out in, 10,000 words. I can go from point A to point B without using 60, 70,000, 80,000 words. This is the piece that actually fits, where the character's thoughts and their background and everything actually works within that word limit. So for me, it's not so much coming up with the ideas as it is on picking the one out of the pile that is actually word count appropriate for the anthology.
That's great. I think for new writers who are for beginning to hone their craft and get in, if you have not written short fiction, I would encourage you to do so. There's nothing like the feeling of accomplishment to know that you are good enough, and really it feels like you're a real professional writer. When you can when you can take an idea from someone else and say, okay, I can do this. I can craft a story. I can create it from beginning to end and turn this thing in. If you've not done that, I would highly recommend you write some short fiction and start trying to get it published. It's an amazing feeling. Samuel, how do you keep coming up with ideas for anthologies and themes? And are your anthologies, is there an overarching theme that you're going for, or is there some rhyme or reason as to the direction that you're steering this behemoth?
A lot of the ideas come from the folks in the Future Chronicles themselves. People want to write for themes that are there are many more themes than we've got time to do. People have put out First Contact, nano-organisms, cowboys, westerns, wizards, and it would be great to be able to do all that, and maybe eventually we will, but there's only so much time that you have. We're going at an amazing pace right now. We're putting out one chronicle per month, and that's just it's just a pace that I can't see continuing. For this year, we're going to do it. Last year, we did 10. The year before, we did 2. This year, we'll do 12, but we're going to slow it down a little bit. There is no real overarching theme. It's just what I think people want to read. So if my feeling is that something about space opera is something that people would like to read, then let's do a space opera one. Would people rather look at shapeshifters that's coming out? Would people be interested in things that have to do with gaming? So there is a Gamer Chronicles coming out. Sometimes I want to challenge the folks, so I'll say, well, let's do something called the Jurassic Chronicles and see what folks can do. And towards the end of the year, we're going to be doing the Mars Chronicles, which essentially is going to be our tribute to Ray Bradbury and the Red Planet. Some people think that this is a reaction to The Martian being a monster hit. Well, we love that it's a monster hit, but really the Mars Chronicles is our tribute to Ray Bradbury, and it's going to be very interesting as well. So the themes come from everywhere, but whether a theme gets chosen or not depends very, very much on, to put it simply, what I would like to read, because that's where it all starts.
I love that. Let's shift gears for just a second. Therin, if you could give one piece of advice to a new writer, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say don't limit yourself. I know a lot of new writers, they come in and they think, they see all these, rules for writing floating around everywhere. And they see things that other authors have written and they think, I have to write like this, I have to write like that, I have to write these themes, I have to write characters like this, I have to write in this POV or that POV. And really, finding yourself as a writer isn't so much just, following a set of rules and repeating them over and over again. It's figuring out what you like best. And you can't do that very well when you set strict limits on yourself. You actually have to explore first. Go a lot of different directions before you really hit your stride, figure out what you're good at, figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then once you've found your place, then you can march forward and really expand yourself and really grow as a writer. So don't limit yourself too much when you're starting out. You don't have to be like anybody else. You don't have to write like anybody else. You need to find who you are as a writer and go from there.
Find your own unique voice. I like that. Will, what about you? If you could give one piece of advice to a new writer, what would it be?
Crap happens. I've only been in this, 3 years now, I guess. But in that time, it was right when I started, it was right about the time that, perma-free on Amazon stopped being effective, so I've never been able to utilize that as a tool. And then now we've seen the advent of Kindle Unlimited, and then the changing rates there, and there's so many things there that, I've seen people if it's not going to pay me this much, then I might as well just not write. And I've seen a lot of they think, okay, I can't make money at this, and that's that's a shame. But then there's other people too that I've seen. They wrote one story or one book, and it just didn't take off like they thought it was going to. I'm like, you can't write one thing and expect it to be an overnight success. You're not James Patterson. James Patterson worked really hard at what he did to be the success that he is today. Now, he did all that hard work so he can kick back and have other people write his books for him now. But, he worked really hard in the first place to do that, and you can't just expect to slap some words on a page and have them instantly be successful. And, we all have stuff that happens in our lives. And in the last year and a half, we've had deaths in the family, and I went through an adoption, which, is great, but traumatic at the same time. And it's just a lot of stuff going on. And, you just got to keep plugging along and find a pace that works for you. But if this is what you want to do, then do it. And don't worry about how much it pays. If you really want to make a career out of it, I guess you probably should do that. But, I'm just right now doing it because I like doing it. I'm not really worrying about how much I make. So, stuff happens.
Well, and I think that's the sign of a real writer, is that you're going to write whether it makes money or not. That's you are a writer because you write, not because you have any measurable amount of success. Those are two different things.
Yeah, Sam still has my PayPal information, which, make sure you keep that. But that's it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I didn't drop you. I was just there.
Okay. Jennifer, what about you? What one piece of advice would you give to a new writer?
I would say just really trust and have faith in the process of learning to be a writer, right? Part of learning to be a writer is writing and writing some more and becoming a better writer and really training to be a writer. And I see a lot of writers who kind of get panicky in the first year or so and say, well, it's not enough. And yeah, probably it isn't, because you've just started, and it takes some time. And but just really having that faith that, like many things, you can learn to be a writer. Some people are perhaps born amazing writers, but other people can learn, and reading a lot really helps too. And I know that sounds trite. We always say writers need to read, but for me, it was a lot about reading very specifically for something I was struggling with at that point in time, right? So at one point, I got feedback, I used too many adverbs. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, how many are you really supposed to use, right? And so I actually, went to novels that I have on my shelf and counted the number of ly words, right? And thought, okay, well, they have 20 per page or 10 per page or whatever. And then I reviewed my own work against that. And I know that you're not supposed to compare necessarily with other writers, but it's just helpful. You hear these rules like no adverbs, but does that really mean none? Or does that mean less, right? Or fewer? And so that really kind of reading for specific things that you're struggling with and writing enough to know what you're struggling with perhaps, and then being able to check back and say, okay, how do I fix this particular small thing right now that I'm focusing on today that I'm struggling with? So, but yeah, trusting that you can do that, I think is a big part of it, and not becoming panicky or concerned when it's not happening right away.
I love that, reading for a specific thing and using that as kind of research into seeing how other people work their craft, because like you referred to, Stephen King famously admonishes people to throw out all adverbs. But then Neil Gaiman turns around and says, no, that's complete hogwash. You should never be scared to use adverbs if they're appropriate. And if you read those two writers, their style and their voice are very different, and both of those things are fully appropriate for them. And they may or may not be for you, but but you don't know that unless you understand and can read those and start to pick out why things work for certain people and why they don't. So that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, I mean, even things like, I mean, I even did it recently, and reading a wide range of things for that thing. I just even did it for paragraph length. How long are other people's paragraphs, right? 3 sentences, 5, what's the average? And I looked at literary fiction, I looked at genre fiction, I compared them. Really helpful to take, I mean, that's my scientific approach to writing.
Yeah.
What's a paragraph?
So what is the perfect paragraph?
It really does vary, right? Like if you look at genre fiction, it's often 2 to 3 sentences, but some literary fiction can be as much as 10 to 12, right? And there's a really distinct difference. And it was really instructive for me to do that. And I realized my paragraphs were a bit too long. And I did that specifically based on an editor starting to break up a lot of my paragraphs. And I thought, okay, well, why is he breaking up all of my paragraphs? Does he know something I don't? And so I went and did some research, and now I'm much more competent at that.
Wow. I've been meaning to talk to you about your paragraphs, but no. No. Samuel, you come from the unique perspective of being a writer and a publisher and a bit of a mentor for new writers. What one piece of advice would you give to someone?
Keep writing. To write 1,000 words, that's great. You'll have had to write 1,000,000 words before that. I don't know what the actual number will be. And there's no one answer. Neil Gaiman doesn't have the answer, and Stephen King doesn't have the answer, because we're all very different. And each one of us is still trying to find their voice, and you're blessed if you eventually do find that unique voice. But in order to find that voice, you're going to have to write a lot. And it's not just going to be 1 story, 2 story, 3 stories. You're going to have to keep writing until suddenly you'll find out that you'll write with a cadence and a rhythm that you feel is entirely yours and that you're comfortable with. And that's your voice. And that's the one thing that nobody else can usurp. And when you do that, it's magical. But you'll have to keep writing, and you'll have to keep writing. Everybody else in the around the table has said really good things. There's no one thing that you should do, but work on your craft. And when you finally make it, and you feel that you've got an audience, pay it forward. I think that's what I always tell people: pay it forward.
That's brilliant advice. One last question for each of you, and Jennifer, we'll start with you. What are you? It's still January. We're at the end of January, but the year is still new. What are you looking forward to in 2016, and what can we expect from you?
Well, I've recently taken a short hiatus due to a death in the family, but I'll be getting back to writing pretty quickly. I am working on a novel for my pen name, which I do not reveal, but it's almost finished. And then I'll be starting the next in my Derivatives of Displacement series, which I have to finish by mid-May. And then I'm really looking forward to writing for the Gamer Chronicles. And after that, I'll probably do book 5 in my Derivatives of Displacement series. I'd really like to get out 2 books in that series this year. And that's about all I have planned right now.
Excellent. I thought that was just going to be a trilogy. There's going to be 5?
5. There are 5 Derivatives of Displacement. Well, actually, there's even more. I could go on forever, but there's 5 commonly used ones.
There's an 11-year-old in my house that's going to be very happy with that news.
Excellent.
So, but thank you. Will, what about you?
Actually, so this is coming out, Alt.History 102 on January 31st. And my next novel is coming out February 4th. It's actually co-written with my brother Paul, who's a Chronicles writer himself. He was in the Cyborg Chronicles. And we spent the last year working on that. And then I have, like I said, a story in Illustrated Robot. And that's what I have written so far. After that, good question. Probably the 3rd novel in my Dead Sleep series is up next. I actually kind of stopped working on that a year and a half ago because of family things. And I need to get back to that and finish it. I do have about a third of it written, so I just need to get back to it and get back into that world. And that's going to be priority number 1, and then anything else this year is probably gravy after that.
Great. Therin, what about you?
Oh, what am I not working on this year? Let's see. First off, I got to catch up with my Echoes series. I have a short that's coming out for that. That's going to be free for all my subscribers. Followed by the third book in the series. I launched an urban fantasy pen back in November, so I have to write the first sequel for my first series for that. And then I have to pick up with the next book in my Arcadian Heights series, under my Therin Night pen name, which I've been meaning to write for a long time, and I haven't, and I'm pretty sure if I don't write it soon, somebody's going to come after me with a pitchfork. So then for the rest of the year, my spring, summer, and fall, I'll be kind of switching back and forth between my Echo series and my urban fantasy series called City of Crows. And I also have 2 more pen names I'm going to launch at some point this year, which are probably going to be at a much slower publication schedule for obvious reasons. But I just want to really get those out there. I have multiple genre interests, so I'm trying to kind of get those all geared up a little bit so that I can have a steady stride next year and can kind of balance all of those together. So I got a lot to do this year. Yeah.
Sounds like a busy year coming up.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll look forward to seeing those. Samuel, I know you've got a Chronicles book coming out every month this year.
Yeah, Therin is the only person who makes me feel like a slouch.
I know, right? I know. I'm looking at things that I need to get busy on. That's very motivating.
So Alt.History 102 coming out January 31st, followed up soon after by the Doomsday Chronicles, and Illustrated Robot, which is going to be an interesting thing because it's going to be a Robot Chronicles, but with illustrations for each of the titles. After that, we're going to start with the Chronicle Worlds series. We're starting with Chronicle Worlds Phaland. We'll come up with Paradisi, Drifting Isle, and Halfway Home. And this is another different concept where writers write in a shared universe. So Phaland, which is the first one, is going to be a shared universe with a fairy gamer theme. Paradisi is a space opera in a shared universe. Drifting Isle is a shared steampunk universe, and Halfway Home is the universe that was created by Hugh Howey in his novel. So Chronicle Worlds is going to be an interesting series as well. That's going to be coming up this year. Alt.History 103, the follow-up to 102, will be coming up, and then we'll culminate in the Mars Chronicles at the end of the year, after which I sit down and think, do I still want to do this at this pace, or do I try to make time for my other writings? But right now I'm trying not to think beyond the Mars Chronicles, but there already is a lineup for that. In fact, we've got, I think, maybe 5 or 6 authors already announced for the Mars Chronicles. Each one of them have either worked for or are working for NASA. So it's going to be an interesting title when it comes out.
So cool. It's an exciting time for speculative fiction fans and writers. Thank you for all you do, Samuel. And thank you all for joining me on the podcast this week.
Thanks, Hank.
Thank you.